Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about some of the most worthwhile DLCs to get for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Starting at number 5, we have the Champions of Chaos DLC. And the value proposition of this DLC doesn't come from the campaigns themselves necessarily. Sure, Valkia and Festus are perfectly fine, Village and Azazel less so, but everyone who plays Warhammer 3 can play Be'lakor in Immortal Empires. Really, the value proposition here is from the various units, heroes, and lords that you do get as part of this DLC. Because if we look at what Warriors of Chaos have, it is pretty damn freaking ridiculous. You gotta admit that. Now, the important thing here is that if you're playing Siege, if you're playing Slaanesh, if you're playing Nurgle, if you're playing Khorne, you want this DLC. It is a DLC that affects all the Monogod factions, and it obviously affects Daniel as well as an uninvited legendary Lord of Chaos. So you get things like Chosen of Khorne, Chosen of Siege, Chosen of Slaanesh, all those kind of things. Like all these kind of units that you wouldn't have access to. This is DLC that's worth it more if you're playing a Siege campaign than Shadows of Change. It's a DLC that's worth it more if you're playing a Nurgle campaign than Thrones of Decay. So it is a really important DLC that really makes your campaign experience better. With Khorne, sure, you get Wrathmongers and Skull Reapers, but with Khorne, I would say Arbel's campaign is the best one to play, and this DLC is actually better for Arbel in particular, and even Skarbrand, than getting Omens of Destruction. You get an extra generic hero choice with the Exalted Hero of Khorne. While Blood Speakers are certainly worth recruiting more if you're playing in a Khorne campaign than the Lord choice over here, the generic Lord choice of Khorne, the Castle Lord of Khorne, if you will, I would dare argue that from the perspective of units, army variety, and just sheer fun, this DLC is absolutely worth it. It affects all the Monogod factions and gives you a ton of different choices that are pretty strong and worth getting in your campaign. So that is my recommendation behind Champions of Chaos. At number 4, it is Omens of Destruction, specifically Omens of Destruction for the Ogres. Now, I think the Ogres are a much better race in Warhammer 3 than they were before. They went from being one of the worst to being one of the better races to play during the course of a campaign. So that is certainly a good selling point for the Ogres in general. Why the Omens of Destruction version of the Ogres as opposed to just the Ogre race pack? Well, certainly Scrag and Greases' campaigns are worthwhile, but I do think Maneater's campaign is one of the most fun and interesting campaigns in general to play in the game. You do have this very dynamic campaign where you travel around the world, beat people up, and get paid for it. You do certainly have some diplomatic limitations. You can't get alliances of any kind of description, but it doesn't necessarily matter. You won't really feel that limitation as much in a campaign, at least in the short term. In the long term, it does cause certain issues, but they really sold this idea of being a mercenary. But beyond the fact that Maneater's campaign is just a wonderful campaign in general, it is also the fact that you do get various units as part of this DLC that are just worthwhile. Things like the real Maneaters, Golg's Maneaters, they do have things like Yetis, the Eshin Maneater, which is really a fun regiment renown. I can't stress this enough. Like, when most regiments renown, I'm kind of whatever. With the Eshin Maneater, it is a genuinely fun unit to have and use during the course of a campaign. So absolutely worthwhile, absolutely worth getting this particular DLC if you're looking to play the Ogres in Warhammer 3. You don't need to spend the money on this. You could just get the Ogre race pack if you want to play just Greases and Scrag, but I do think that this is the ultimate Ogre experience in the game, from my perspective on the subject. Highly recommended. Good legendary lord, good skill line, good units, good value proposition. Obviously on the more expensive side, because otherwise I would probably put it higher on this list. But to be sure, Omens of Destruction from an Ogre standpoint is worth it. Not necessarily so much from a Greenskin standpoint or a Khorne standpoint. Well, Khorne kind of like Skull Reapers, Wrathmongers, legendary heroes, but certainly worth it from an Ogre perspective. At number 3 is the Warden and the Paunch DLC that came in Warhammer 2. Now, the value of this DLC doesn't necessarily come from the campaigns that are part of it. I think both Elfarian and Grom the Paunch have fairly substantial issues in their campaigns, and certainly High Elves are not in a great state as a race right now. Though I suspect that will be changing very soon with the Slash DLC that is likely going to rework the High Elves. So it might just end up being from a questionable campaign with Elfarian to being a really good campaign. Hopefully, we will see on that subject. But the value proposition of this DLC is not necessarily related to the High Elves, though they do get the Archmage Lord through this DLC, which is absolutely a worthwhile lore choice for the High Elves, given how they work currently. I'm curious to see how that is going to shape up going forward. But no, the value proposition of this DLC is not the campaigns, it's not the High Elven stuff, so that stuff is questionable. But it is one thing, one very specific thing. It's not the units, regiments, renowned, though sure, Stone Trolls, River Trolls to a lesser extent are worthwhile units, but I personally do really prefer Stone Trolls. Great units, line breakers, great in sieges, just very, very durable as units, good amount of damage. But the reason this DLC is worthwhile if you're looking to play any Greenskin campaign is because of the Giant River Troll Hags. See, Greenskins will usually take more damage in battles. Be it auto-resolve or manual battles, they will take a higher level of damage just because of how their units work, the armor level on their units, their specific playstyle. So you do want, quite badly, a way of improving casualty replenishment. Otherwise, your campaign progress is going to slow down to a crawl. Enter the Giant River Troll Hag. As far as heroes go, it's not really a great hero choice. Like, magic capability is lacking, melee capability is lacking, but she does give you casualty replenishment. It does feel pretty bad, I'm not going to lie, to recommend the DLC just purely because it gives you a casualty replenishment hero. But casualty replenishment is one of those things in the game that does matter an enormous amount. And as a result of that, this specific DLC is one of the more important DLCs that you should get in the context of Warhammer 3. Again, there's other things that are part of this DLC. I don't necessarily think those things are as worthwhile as the Giant River Troll Hag. The Giant River Troll Hag is a game changer in any Greenskin campaign. If you're playing Greenskins without this DLC, you're going to have a very different and worse campaign experience than if you do own this DLC. King and the Warlord used to be important because it added nasty skulkers, but you no longer need nasty skulkers. I mean, it still gives you Skarsenik's campaign, which is certainly a great campaign, but to be quite blunt about it, Skarsenik is nowhere near as important as having the Warden and the Punch if you're looking to play a Greenskin campaign. Like, be it Gorbat, Grimgor, Azag. Hell, even if you're playing Skarsenik, you still want this DLC if you're looking to have that campaign experience with him. Or Warzak, you again want this DLC. One can argue over Omens of Destruction because of the Savage Orc Great Shaman, Savage Orc Shaman. A lore choice, to be sure. But they did change how Orc War Bosses work, so there's plenty of benefits in making it work with Orc War Bosses, though there are plenty of benefits with Savage Orc Shamans on that subject. But all the same, I do think this DLC is worth it. And by the way, don't be mistaken for the idea, oh, you can get 5% casualty replenishment for Orcs. For that, you can also get Shrooms through research in a campaign. So you might be thinking, oh, I can make it work in other ways. You could, but again, there's not necessarily it's not necessarily going to be as good as how much casualty replenishment you're going to get through the sake of a single hero focused on that subject. And number 2, we have the Shadow and Blade DLC for the Skaven and the Dark Elves. For the Dark Elves, you get the Master Hero, Regiment's Renown, couple of units. That's useful, but not necessarily too important. Well, Master is important, but other things, not necessarily so much. For the Skaven, however, you get Death Master Snitch's campaign, which has one of the best campaign starts for the Skaven in general. Say what you will about Ikeclaw or Fraud, their early game is not especially the best in the world. Snitch has a really fun and interesting early game and a lot of potential in a long campaign over here with his Kafan start. So that's great. I think as a Legendary Lord, he does certainly work quite well in a lot of ways. You might have to fight more battles manually in this campaign than, say, with Claw, but it's certainly a legendary lord that does work very well. But on top of that, compared to the other Skaven DLCs, let's consider what this DLC is adding for the actual Skaven. First off, you get Warp Grinders, an awesome support unit that is available for the Skaven with things like Wall Breaker, support abilities, and just really useful to have in a fight in general. The amount of damage this thing can do against buildings, the amount of usefulness it has on the battlefield cannot be overstated. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you get Poison Wind Mortars, which are just plainly ridiculous in as far as a ranged unit or kind of like an infantry artillery unit provides in a battle. These two units alone would be very, very worthwhile. Now, one can argue over the fact that, well, you get Rattling Gunners and Giselles if you purchase Claw. To be sure, but Rattling Gunners and Giselles also want to have Warp Grinders alongside them. You also want to have Poison Wind Mortars. There's all kinds of different benefits in purchasing this DLC. Things like Ashen Triads are also useful, shouldn't be underestimated. But yeah, this DLC offers a great campaign for the Skaven in Deathmaster and Snitch, some very useful units, Regiment's Renown, just a really good playstyle, and I think that it makes it one of the better campaigns to get in Warhammer 3. Just in general, this will make your Skaven campaign experience better. I could have argued in favor of Claw, but here's the thing. Lizardman, the Lizardman part of the Prophet and Warlock is completely fucking pointless. The Dark Elven part, yeah, Malice Darkblade is not the best campaign, but Dark Elves work in Warhammer 3. Lizardmen don't work in Warhammer 3, so there is that difference. Like, you will generally get more value out of this DLC for the game than you will from Prophet and Warlock. Just because of that Lizardman situation. And even if Lizardmen were better, I would hesitate to argue that a Cult of Sotek is really a worthwhile campaign to engage in the context of Warhammer 3. That is where I stand. There's quite a few issues with that campaign. It literally breaks the game and the game AI because of what ends up happening over there. With that global war that starts between all the Skaven factions and all the Lizardman factions, it literally ends up breaking the game, which is not really something you want. So I'd stay far away from the Lizardman campaign in Prophet and Warlock, whereas I wouldn't say the same about Shadow and Blade. With either of campaigns, I think both. I think Snitch is certainly worth playing. I don't think Malice Darkblade is complete misery. I think he's just boring as a campaign, but not horrible. Finally, at number 1 is Fro the Cave for both the Empire and the Dwarves. From a Dwarven perspective, you get flat out the best campaign in the game, and that is Malachi McKayson's campaign, available over here in Crockett Rock. You also, of course, get some useful things, in particular the Casualty Replenishment Hero. So that's one of the selling points of Fro the Cave. What makes Warden and Punch worthwhile is the fact that they get the Casualty Replenishment for the Greenskins. This is the equivalent for the Dwarves. Though, to be fair, Dwarves need that less. All the same, Malachi's campaign is so freaking awesome that it makes it worthwhile. Like, there's other DLCs that are not on this list that I didn't include because, well, yeah, the campaigns might be good for the context of the race. Like Oxyotl, I don't think Lizardmen are worth playing, as an example. I also don't think Beastmen are worth playing at the moment. There's just races that worked well when they were reworked in Warhammer 2 that didn't make the transition for Warhammer 3. And I think Beastmen are certainly one of those races. Okay, so you get a really good campaign for Dwarves. The Nurgle part, I mean, I think Tamarkan is the best Nurgle campaign. Unless you're focused on Plagues, in which case Festus is a better campaign. But to be sure, like as a Legendary Lord, I think Tamarkan works out. The thing, however, that I want to highlight is the Empire. I don't think Elspeth has the best Empire campaign. It's certainly workable, certainly very powerful, but I think Karl Franz just has a far more interesting and fun campaign in general. However, what this DLC adds to the Empire cannot be understated. Let's take a look at the kind of situation. First off, you get a lore choice for the Empire that is one of the better lore choices that you get, because you get the Master Engineer. And given the Empire playstyle at the moment, where their melee infantry is not really the best in the world, so you want to focus on ranged and cavalry, Master Engineers work wonders in a campaign. That's point number one. Point number two has to do with engineer heroes. So you got master engineers, you got engineer heroes, which give you crucially things like triangulation. To be sure, dwarven engineers are flat out better than these guys, but you do get things like restock, you get missile strength, you get black powder discipline. You get all kinds of benefits available over here with respect to engineer heroes for the Empire. So that's point number two. You get good lore choice, you get good hero choice available for the Empire, and then you get a couple of really damn good units. Crucially, you get Hawkland long rifles and known iron sights. If Prophet and Warlock is worth it just because it literally adds 2 units for the Skaven, then Fro the Cave for Empire is worth it far more. You get a great lore choice that complements the range playstyle, you get a good hero choice that complements the range playstyle, and you get the equivalent of Jezzail's. And not quite the equivalent of Rattling Gunners, but you do get some of the better gunpowder units available in the game. And look, landships, sure, steam tanks are generally better, but yeah, you do get volley gun steam tanks, which are just flat out the better unit compared to regular steam tanks in most situations. But landships aren't completely horrible, it's just, yeah, steam tanks are just flat out the better unit. So this DLC, the value proposition of this DLC is very significant. In every Imperial campaign, this is the DLC you want to own, and the only DLC you may want to own if you're looking to play an Imperial campaign. And that makes it so very attractive. Again, like with some other recent DLCs, this is going to be more expensive, but purely just buying the Empire portion of this DLC, I think is worth it far more. But so you do have that situation where you're not buying stuff you don't necessarily care about. Though, of course, you know, they increase the price, so it's actually a loss overall. But if you're looking at buying stuff from the Cave, I'd say the Empire and Dwarves are very, very much worth it. Nurgle less so, though, to be sure, Nurgle does have some advantages from this DLC as well. So that's my perspective on the 5 most worthwhile DLCs in Total War Warhammer 3. Let me know what you guys think, and stay tuned for more.